What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, subscribe to our Patreon free for behind-the-scenes stuff. Arm yourselves, life stuff. I think we're coming to the end of the sociopath arc, at least as a primary focus. And this video is my main takeaway. Not how they function, not their quirks, not this and that. Although the final, well, quotes final, ASPD information board will be linked in the description. This is what I think of sociopaths now that we've had more experience with them. They're actually pretty normal. And considering everything we've learned, that might sound like a strange thing to say, because of how different they are from Joe Dipshit. But what I mean is, I don't feel abnormality when I'm speaking with them anymore. And I don't think that's just familiarity with them, though that plays a part. Rather, it's more an undoing of the stigma. Because if you were interacting with a sociopath without that stigma, which you probably have, and you probably do interact with sociopaths without the stigma because you don't know that they're sociopaths, they aren't all that strange. And you don't need to accommodate them in special ways. You don't need to have your guard up in special ways. They're more like normal people who fall under one archetypal umbrella. Now, when I first started dealing with sociopaths, I got this intense pinching feeling in the back of my neck. And that happened naturally before I knew anything about sociopathy, about antisocial personality disorder, because they are different on a level you can feel, but it doesn't stay that way. What happened with me was my guard and expectations calibrated to them after a while, and now I don't feel much of anything. And you do need to keep your guard up around them, but you need to keep your guard up around everybody. But we'll get into that. The first thing to note about sociopaths is they are very concerned with control. And without the ASPD stigma, this isn't a necessarily abnormal thing. Lots of people are concerned with control. Rather, with sociopaths, you need to let them set the tone at first. You watch those dog pack videos in which dogs with different temperaments clash at first and then find an equilibrium. Their instinct will be to establish their perimeter hard and fast. And there are a bunch of different ways they can do this. And interestingly, it's not the stigma frames them as even when I talk about control, they aren't necessarily trying to alpha you. It can feel that way, but that's not what they're doing. Rather, they are establishing their boundaries, and part of that, I think, is trying you a little bit to let you know they'll fight for their boundaries, but rarely will they be trying to impose their boundaries all over you. So, if you make it clear your goal isn't to trample on their boundaries, they're inclined not to trample on yours either. Respect is a big thing with sociopaths. Trust, too, and that probably comes from their childhoods. I haven't met a sociopath who's had a good childhood. And people talk about them like they're these master manipulators, but if we're thinking social games, this initial trampling should be a manipulative faux pas. And it is, but this is what I mean by they are not master manipulators. Now, they do have manipulative tendencies, but that plays into the guard calibration thing, which we'll get to. Anyway, you make it clear you're not someone they're gonna run over, but also aren't someone who will be fucking with them or want to fuck with them. And then you achieve equilibrium. And once you're in equilibrium, sociopaths are fun to speak with because they're some of the only people who make sense if your outlook looks a certain way. Because even the low-level ones do a lot of thinking. They're very analytical people. This doesn't mean they're smarter than everybody. This doesn't mean their ideas are all correct. Rather, their headspace is full of lots of thoughts. They aren't fucking dumb and boring. And because they probably realized they're different from other people early, there is a lifetime of reflection going on there you can discuss with them. Always interesting. And another thing people talk about with sociopaths is how they're always trying to get over on you. There is an element of truth to that, but probably not in the way you're thinking about it. On the positive side of this, I've found sociopaths to be relatively safe people to invest in. Now, nobody is safe to invest in, but if you want to invest in someone, sociopaths are, ironically, the safer investments. And that's because of their transactionality. They are transactional people, but when you're dealing with them, and this is a video about you as a baseline person dealing with a sociopath, you don't feel like they're keeping score at all times, even if they are. And even if they are, they're a bit crowish or ravenish. If you do right by them, they are inclined to do right by you. And that might have something to do with their control fixation, a balancing of scales. But again, even if it is, it doesn't feel transactional or inhuman because they are not inhuman. They are chronically human. We said that a few times, but it is the case. When you're dealing with a sociopath, they are humanity concentrates, which is interesting because of their low affect. Much of their humanity might be happening under the surface or outside their consciousness, but you, as a person dealing with them, feel it all the time, all over. In other words, they don't feel monstrous or robotic to you. They might have that low affect, they might be testy or touchy, but that's in favor of their humanity, not against it. They're also blunt, which is good for knowing where you stand with them. Now, they also tend to be stews of negative emotions. Rage is a big thing with them. Depression is huge. But who isn't angry and depressed? Now, their scales or degrees and triggers might be different, but if you're a generally unhappy person, you'll probably find a lot to relate with in sociopaths. It is a nasty world out here, and being alive is rarely pleasant. Impulsivity is another big thing. If you've watched the videos or done other research on sociopaths, you're familiar with this already. But I bring this up because we are painting a picture of how the standard sociopath looks and feels to deal with as a baseline person. Sociopaths will just do shit. Now, inside, this is something they're struggling with. Many of them develop high discipline in spite of it, but they'll get bored and they'll just do things. Now, putting this full picture together in the context of you're interacting with them in a friendly way, not as an opponent, sociopaths have an emo Indiana Jones vibe. They usually have particular interests they can talk about extensively. They have a darkness to them that doesn't necessarily feel threatening. Rather, they're going through some shit because they're always going through some shit. Little sketchy, they get their hands dirty, and they are relatively comfortable with conflict. If you've ever played the Stalker games or the Anomaly mod, or Gamma that got popular, I view sociopaths as stalkers. They could be affiliated with any number of factions or working toward any number of interests, but they're defined by a lonely, doomed, pensive capability or ruggedness. And if you end up going deeper than this with a sociopath, going further into the zone, you'll get to see and experience the far tenderer sides of them. Wonderfully complicated people. But this is more a day-to-day level. Now, I mentioned opposition and calibrating my guard, because there is another side to sociopaths, which is their more aggressive side. when you are not dealing with them in any equal or friendly way. These are some things to be aware of. Even if a sociopath likes you, they will be manipulating you on a low, subtle frequency. So low and so subtle, they probably won't be aware they're doing it. Now, how do you deal with this if you are on positive terms with a sociopath? The main thing is to stick to your guns. See, that's another thing. Their manipulation, even when they're doing it on this low level, it might not be a negative thing. They might be trying to help you by manipulating you without realizing it. But it's still manipulation, and you need to be aware of it. You deal with it by knowing what you are and where you're positioned in the world and in relation to other people. Because they manipulate when they're doing it like this in a positional way. It always feels like they are trying to move you to a different position. And yes, everybody is sort of doing that with one another, but with sociopaths, you can feel it stronger and you can chart what they do and when. This is not a passive thing, although it is happening for them on a passive level. It is tactical. They're trying to position you as a person who either will benefit them better or they believe will benefit you better, but ideally both. All you need to do is not let them. You know who you are, you know what you want, you know why you are and why you want what you want. And then those smaller efforts won't work. I've found they will, or what they're doing will slowly rise to consciousness once they realize you are not moving. I still think this is unconscious because if this were strategic, they wouldn't react the way they will react. And the way they'll react is to get more forceful. And that's the point at which you alert them to what they're doing. And you don't try to convince them, you don't explain it to them at length, you tell them, I see that you are trying to move me in this direction. That's not a direction I want to move because this is what I am. And they'll usually react negatively to that at first, which is why you're trying or not trying to convince them. But usually they'll ease up. Because we mentioned control, we've mentioned that a couple times now. They don't, or they won't like that they're doing things that they don't realize they're doing, because that's another thing they don't have control over. Just be aware. If you feel you are being moved or pushed or pressured, you are, but it's something you can resolve, and once your guard is calibrated to them, it doesn't, or those efforts don't feel like much. Oh, and if we're talking about guard calibration, that's another thing. You'll need to calibrate to their flavor of bluntness, because they'll use their bluntness to test you. And this sometimes feels like it's intentional. Well, I know sometimes it's intentional, but other times it's not exactly. As in, I think for them, if they aren't doing it intentionally, it's a variation of sizing somebody up. If you size people up, you do it naturally, you don't think about it. But you deal with that the same way you deal with their passive manipulation. You establish your boundaries. And if they keep fucking with it, you walk away. Simple. Now, as opponents, they don't feel as normal. Now, again, they aren't these genius strategists necessarily. Rather, they will ambush you with ruthlessness. Outside common sense or common decency, any sort of rules. And at least for me, that's still surprising. But it shouldn't be, and the way you determine if you're at risk is whether or not you have anything worth taking, or anything they might want, or benefits they would receive if you were to suffer a bad fall, per se. That's more of an extreme example, but with sociopaths who are oppositional, not really a big exaggeration there. Keep your guard up, high up, and if you can, I mean, you can always feel your vulnerabilities. You can feel where you wouldn't want to be hit. That is probably where they'll hit you, and they'll do it fast. They will inflict a worst case scenario on you. Be aware they're there. Be aware of your risk level based on what they would have to gain by fucking you over, and then prepare for worst case scenarios. Now, all in all, sociopaths are different. Their actions or habits can seem strange, their internal worlds are different, but in your dealing with them, they really aren't that different. Because even if their processes inside were totally different, and I don't think they're totally different, the outcomes will be familiar. There will be familiar and true emotions in what they do, even if they aren't feeling them. And as long as you are not an impersonal and high value target to them, there is not much you have to worry about, and you'll probably enjoy interacting with them. They are clever, sad, capable, interesting people. Chronically human. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.